Ancient Greece in 500 BCE was one of the most expansive and influential civilizations at the time. Greece had been the home of many famous and influential mathematicians, philosophers, politicians, and commanders like Pythagoras, Aristotle, Themistocles, and Solon, whose influence and ideology would eventually spread out of the Mediterranean and over space and time, eventually highly influencing our modern day society. Even though the city-states were not united, Greece would try to expand and diffuse their ideology to competing empires like the massive Persian Empire at the time. But the Persians were not very keen of Greece meddling in their affairs, causing Persia to respond with a threat to invade the Greek Empire and destroy their ideology. Thus, the Greek city-states had to compromise insofar that they agreed to put aside their rivalries and quarrels to take up arms and unite themselves to tackle the conflict of protecting their empire and ideology from the expansive Persian Empire. The conflict started in 499 BCE when the city-states of Athens and Eretria supported a revolt of the Persian satrap of Ionia. The Persian Emperor Darius ruthlessly destroyed the rebellion and vowed to add Greece to his empire because Athens supported the rebellion against him. He invaded Greece through Thrace and conquered Macedonia, but a storm wrecked his fleet, forcing him to abandon the initial invasion. But Darius did not forget about the revolt, and he launched a second invasion. Historian Eric Luft, in his article Persian Wars, describes the invasion. In 490 BCE, Darius sent a force estimated at about between 15,000 and 25,000 troops into Greece, crossing the Aegean in 600 ships. Starting from the island of Samos, the Persians beat the city-state of Euboea and moved into Attica. Athenian general Miltiades the Younger, with a united force of Athenians and Platanias, used the mobility of their hoplites in phalanx formation to lure and surround and destroy the Persian invasion on an open plain in Marathon, known as the Battle of Marathon. The compromise between the Athenians and the Plataeans, in their agreement to put aside their differences and take up arms against the Persians, deterred the second invasion. The Battle of Marathon was one of the first major Greek victories with the compromise of two Greek city-states, which inspired many Greek city-states to come together and fight against the Persians. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus describes the victory as highly inspiring in Book 6, The Histories. Afterwards, praising the Athenians and the deed done by them, the Spartans went off back again. This would mark the end of the second invasion. The second invasion would be Darius's last invasion. His son Xerxes would go on to avenge his father's loss after his death. Xerxes would invade Greece with a force of 600 ships and 350,000 men for a third time. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus in his book The Histories of Herodotus, Xerxes himself thought the army was so big that he had doubts if the Greeks would even fight back. Tell me, therefore, what thinkest thou? Will the Greeks lift a hand against us? Luff again describes Xerxes' invasion. Xerxes quickly marched southward, encountering resistance at Thermopylae, yet winning and destroying it and doing the same to Athens. When Xerxes destroyed Athens, he returned home and left his army under the command of Persian general Mardonius. The destruction of Athens and the defeat of Thermopylae was a major blow for the Greeks, but nevertheless, the Greek city-states continued to fight with a high morale because of the inspiring tales and stories about the heroic Battle of Marathon. As stated by ancient Greek historian Thucydides, in their victory there, they allowed the barbarian troops that they had routed to flee, and then as Persians fled, the Athenians pursued them and cut them down until they reached the sea, where they called for fire and started to seize the Persian ships. Mardonius would continue attack by sea more than land, with Persia's strong navy. The naval turning points of the war, per historian Spencer Tucker's point of view in this article, Battles of Artemisium, where he tells us that the Battles of Artemisium comprised of three important naval battles during the Persian Wars. The indecisive encounters at Artemisium weakened the Persian naval contingent with minimal losses to the Greek side, which revealed much about the Persian naval capabilities, and later they prepared for a second fight at Salamis. But the historians of Encyclopedia Britannica had another opinion, describing the battle as a Persian naval victory and a withdrawal of the Greek fleet. Either a victory or an indecisive result, it was clear that the battle showed the vulnerability of Persian naval forces to the Greeks who exploited them in later battle. Historian Paul K. Davis, in his article Sparta, Peloponnesian War, describes that the Battle of Salamis was the turning point of the war instead of the battles of Artemisium, as stated by Spencer Tucker. Davis describes the Battle of Salamis as Themistocles, the Athenian general and strategist, lured 800 large and clumsy Persian ships into the narrow strait at Salamis in September 480. Then trapped and overwhelmed them with his fleet of around 370 small, speedy, shallow drift vessels called triremes. The resounding victory by the Greek was even admitted by Xerxes in the tragic play The Persians by Aeschylus. Dashed from the tyrant vessel on the rocks of Salamis they sunk, and smeared with gore. The heroes on the Derry stand are stretched. The combined Greek forces under the command of Athenian general Themistocles once more comprised and stopped the Persians. Either the battles of Artemisium or the Battle of Salamis was the turning point of the war, but nonetheless, both of the battles were extremely decisive on the course of the war.
In addition to the decisive victory, the Battle of Salamis inspired the Greek land forces at the Battle of Plataea. The aforementioned historian Eric Luft describes the Battle of Plataea. A combined Greek army led by Spartan commander Pausanias finally beat back the third Persian invasion at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE. Mardonius was amongst the Persian dead. On that same day, Athenian-led united Greek forces won another decisive naval triumph against Persia at the Battle of Mycale. Author Lee L. Bryce, in his book Greek Warfare from Battle of Marathon to the Conquest of Alexander